Hello everyone, welcome to the 10th instalment of the Internally Screening podcast. My name's Adam.
My name is Rupert.
And today we saw fit to group together and discuss two of the sleepiest and sort of slowest paced films that we could possibly have found for you. Today we're going to be discussing Nomadland, the recent Oscar winner for 2021, and In the Mood for Love, a dreamy romantic offering from Wong Kar Wai, Chinese film. Wonderful film. We'll be talking about that later. But first, Rupert, tell us what Nomadland is all about.
Yeah, you did manage to match the films very well this week. So, Nomadland, at this point, is the Oscar winner of last year. Directed by Chloe Zhao, starring Frances McDormand. And it is a film about a, I guess, nomadic, obviously, woman who seems to go on this journey of self-discovery after the financial crisis through the sort of... Is it the Midwest the film is set in?
I think so, or just kind of like the panhandle, like sort of, I think, but I'm honestly not sure.
Yeah.
I think sort of like Wyoming and stuff, there's like lots of mountains and stuff. Like
yeah.
That kind of region. She
goes on a quest through an economically depressed America, and it's a very weird pick for best film, but generally quite an interesting approach to a film. It's incredibly quiet. It's the first thing I've ever seen by Chloe Zhao. I've heard about her before, so this is my first time experiencing a film directed by her, and I can see why people are quite excited by her as a prospect. And of course, Frances McDormand is always a welcome face in pretty much any film. She's been incredibly consistent in her later career, and yeah, she absolutely knocks it out of the park. It's, I guess, if I don't really know what to call it as a genre, it feels weird calling it a drama, because it's a film that seems to sort of step away and turn its gaze away from any real human drama as a very sort of stated point. So I guess in a way it's just the world's loneliest road trip movie.
Yeah.
What did you think of it?
That's a good way of putting it. I mean, I thought it was beautiful. I agree with you that right out the gate, I was thinking, how has this, of all things, become the Oscar winner? It feels far too kind of serene and quiet and contemplative to really seem like it would appeal to the sort of people that rate the Oscars. But you know, they've been taking some risks. That last time it was Parasite, so why not? You know, and certainly this is quite a unique film in terms of some of the ways it chooses to kind of portray its world. The most notably for me, when I was watching it, I kind of went in blind. I knew nothing really about it apart from who was in it and who directed it. I saw all these like wonderful performances from the supporting cast, and I thought, wow, that it's so good that it's so natural. Like, how could they have gotten so many like wonderfully talented extras to do all this stuff? And then looking it up afterwards, I discovered that it in fact was, you know, real people, real nomads living this life. And it's this strange kind of transcendent genre bending film that exists somewhere between documentary and drama, where, you know, introducing a fictional character experiencing similar situations to these real people have really faced, it was genuinely really interesting. But I mean, you know, beyond that, the film, I guess, kind of much like a documentary, you know, it has this sort of slow, organic pace to it that's very... I could see putting a lot of people off. Like if, you know, you were trying to recommend to people like, oh, this film won the Oscars, and like then, you know, a bunch of, you know, sort of standard moviegoers try and sit down and digest this one. I can see a lot of people being very impatient with it and turning it off pretty quickly.
It is about as far from Parasite as you can get. Obviously, it's a completely unfair comparison, and the only reason we're doing that is because that's the previous winner. But yeah, it is like almost in terms of actual sort of story beats, really, really sparse. But that's kind of what made me not bored with it, if that makes sense. I was really worried I was going to find it boring, because if I see, you know, an Oscar-nominated film that's really sentimental, it kind of just turns on the cynicism mode in my brain.
Yeah.
But it's like at its core, it's just a really, really genuine exploration of like death and, you know, what it means to be alone. I mean, really, honestly, it was kind of one of the most kind of depressing films I've seen in ages, because it really is just so depressing. But the fact, what I would say is, I was expecting it to be boring. What it actually is just really quiet. It really like lets things breathe. It like there's no point where it feels like it's rushing to anything. Even with the stuff I said, as I said earlier, there are story beats that it hits that you might find in a film that's more structurally conventional. But even with those story beats, it gives, like, you know, a whole sort of 20-30 minutes between those beats. For example, the sort of implied sort of romance between her and this other nomadic man. It gets planted as a seed in the plot, and you wonder if they're even going to come back to it, because it sort of takes its time so much, which actually made it kind of almost gave it a sense of momentum and even sort of tension as you're sort of wondering what she's going to choose to do next.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I think inadvertently there was a great amount of tension in the film because it took its time in that way, and because Frances McDormand's character seemed so reticent to really like make any strong convictions, like and decisions. You know, part of her nomadic lifestyle was almost to remove herself from that burden. Like, you know, I don't have to decide to go on in the face of grief. I can just kind of almost exist in a kind of calm purgatory. I guess, and I think if I had to sum up the film in one word, it almost would be purgatory. It's like, this is what life is like for people kind of outside of life, you know?
It was, and I mean, just speaking of Frances McDormand, I'm always consistently impressed with her. And I was just so impressed with how completely lacking in vanity she was as an actress in this role. Like, for context, within the first 5 minutes of the film, you see her shitting in a bucket. Like, she is, but like, you know, beyond like, you know, the jokes, like, she is just 100% committed to it. And in a role like this, I think maybe a younger, more sort of eager to prove themselves actor might sort of show their hand a bit, maybe play up certain scenes in this far more. And she never really does. It's all very, very subtle. But she's also got, she also imbues the character with a sense of actual personality. There's also, you run the risk of, if you're playing a very understated character like this, like understating it too much, not sort of showing the, you know, the spectrum of emotions that, you know, every single human being does have, you know. So you do really get a sense for what this person was like before they were in this situation as well. With the way she interacts with the various characters she meets, she seems, you know, incredibly genuine.
Absolutely.
That was just so impressive to me, because I don't think I don't think a lot of actors are suited to this, and I don't think they would have picked the role in the first place, which says something, you know, for her ambition. But it also, the fact that she pulled it off so well, I think it's easier said than done when you look at a film like this.
Yeah, 100%. I guess some actors, you know, when they look at a role like this, or any role, in fact, they kind of, you know, focus on 2 or 3 specific kind of core aspects of what makes a person. And, you know, inherently, human life is far more complex than that. In some situations, characters will behave very differently to others. Like, Frances McDormand, when placed in amongst real groups of real human beings, felt, you know, like she belonged there. And I think there's a kind of, you know, a different level to a performance where you can transcend from being just an actor and, you know, someone so convincing that you slip in amongst the genuine real people unnoticed by the audience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there's a couple of other name actors in here. I don't want to say their names just because I think it's kind of better to watch it. But
not knowing,
yeah, but like, they also did a great job. I think there was never really absolutely a moment that pulled me out or anything like that.
No, I agree. I agree.
It was all when it comes down to realism, it did feel incredibly real. And there's a lot of, I guess I don't know how much of this was written is a question, but I really appreciated the film kind of going over what should be really tedious things. Particularly, for example, she's driving around in a sort of rickety old caravan. There's a lot of stuff about her. There's a lot of scenes with her having to deal with issues with a caravan, something breaking, or there being, issues with her caravan, technical issues, and, trying to find somewhere to park and stuff like this, which seem so boring. But because the film lets you sort of live with the character, you almost feel like you're almost there with her. It's kind of like, you end up sort of getting that same anxiety you might get if you're in the car with someone who's trying to find a parking space.
Right.
You're invested in it, and I found myself actually caring about, even these small trivial things about, is she going to run out of money for this, or how's she going to get this thing fixed, or, like, this is broken. It actually becomes investing, and it takes I think, once again, it sounds so simple on paper, but to actually make that investing to a viewer as a film, I think, with that level of subtlety is really, really difficult, and I think they pulled it off really well.
Yeah, I think that can't go understated, really, because to essentially make a film where not really anything happens, and yet so much. That's a cliche, isn't it? Nothing happens, but so much happens. But there's definitely truth to that within this, and the not making it boring is like such a difficult hurdle for Chloe Zhao. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, the character's indecisiveness is kind of like a root of a lot of like her. She can't really sit still. She's kind of always making decisions, but there's like a key kind of trauma to her character that's sort of established early on that she's always running from. And she's very stubborn. She refuses help from anyone that she comes across. So rather than decide to stay and make difficult decisions, she goes, "No, I will not make these decisions. I will run." And as you mentioned earlier, this kind of ties into the romance subplot. Like, really, the kind of core story of the film is one woman dealing with grief, and really, that much doesn't really get addressed properly until really, really late in the film, where we start seeing more of her actual, family life, her personal life, and then sort of and then even at the end, there's not really a reconciliation. There's like suggestions at it. It's like the road keeps going. Not to spoil it too much, but in a film where not much happens, like there's not even that kind of definitive resolution. It's more kind of gestured at, in so much as to say, life goes on and life is complicated. There are no sort of fixed endings and beginnings with any given situation. Things kind of bleed into one another, and there's a sense of hopefulness at the end, but not like nothing close to a definitive sense of finality.
You don't get closure, but I am pretty happy with the way they ended it. I don't think the ending is. It was pretty much exactly what I was expecting, if that makes sense. But okay. It's more what they didn't do that I was really, really happy with, which is, with a slightly more overcooked script, there might have been a monologue about how much she misses her husband or something.
That really just tries to wrap it up.
At some point, even if it's not at the end, have it sort of in the third act as the oh wow moment. And I'm really glad they avoided that, because I found myself way more keenly interested in the film as a result of because Frances McDormand's character is quite obtuse to other characters in the film, and we get to watch it from the sort of omnipresent view of the camera. It becomes a much more interesting sort of puzzle of trying to figure out what it is that she wants, and you're kind of working in tandem with her as a character, because obviously she's someone who's a bit lost. It became way more investing for me having to do that, and even if you did play that kind of scene later on in the film, I think it could have sucked a lot of power out of it and made it less interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it does. I think a couple of moments that really stood out to me in terms of kind of painting in the world and, you know, colouring in and placing her in this nomadic lifestyle. You know, as we've said, all real people, well, largely real life people in real life situations. And it's not really, you know, a situation you find yourself really thinking about, that like there are these sort of new age nomads living out in America and other parts of the world. So to kind of get their story was really eye-opening. And there's two moments, one quite close to the beginning and one towards the end, with the elderly woman she befriends while she's working at Amazon, where she's talking about, semi-spoiler, she's like talking about like wanting to end her own life and like all the, you know, the difficulties that she's faced. That was a really like heart-wrenching moment.
I was literally going to say, when you were talking about your favourite scenes, that was going to be the exact scene I would have gone to.
Yeah. And then towards the end, and I won't talk about what is said in this because that would be too much of a spoiler, genuinely like made me like just straight up cry. Like there's this real life YouTube sort of nomad guru that they talk about at the beginning, and she goes to this kind of like big meetup that happens sort of once every year or so, and he opens up to her. He has like a heart-to-heart with her towards the end about his own personal tragedy, and it was so sad.
Yeah, that
honestly,
shit was bad.
like one of the most like, and this was before I even realized it was real. Like, this shit really happened to this guy. I was just sad because it was like a beautifully told scene, and then to realize this shit happened, like the poor man, like, damn, still kind of makes me tear up a little bit.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
Yeah. But we've talked a lot about what we really like about this film. Do you have any gripes, Rupert? Do you have anything? You know?
I have a couple. The main conflict I felt was actually a thematic one. I think the main thing the film delivers in terms of the most consistent themes that were the most rewarding for me throughout the film were sort of the dealing with grief, the dealing with the concepts of coming to terms with your own mortality, and the sort of closeness to nature that the majority of these characters, especially Frances McDormand, seem to really embrace. That those were the most consistent themes. But it was more of the sort of offset of the film, is that it's never really made entirely clear what the film's going for in terms of, is Frances McDormand sort of supposed to be an economic refugee who is only doing this? I feel like it tries to have it both ways, and I might not phrase this very well. Is she like an economic refugee who you know has just hit hard times, and all of the permanence they thought they had in their life has kind of been swept away from under their feet? Because that's that's interesting, and that seems to be something that the film clearly has a lot of political implications within it, in implying that this is part of the case, because she can barely get by the entire film, and that's one of the tensions. Or is it a film about someone who just wants to, who isn't interested in settling down and is becoming a nomad, and is rejecting the convention of modern day lifestyle where everything is focused around settling down? Because I don't really feel like you can have both, and I don't know. It may be just. Do you see what I mean?
I do kind of see what you mean. In so much as perhaps there's an argument that you weaken one of your sort of statements, or sort of, if you're trying to make a political statement about people being sort of forcibly moved, and the economy not really caring about the little person once they stop being useful to them. Because it should be mentioned, we didn't say earlier that the inciting sort of moments that lead her to down this route is that her whole town is based around like a factory. Is it?
Oh yes, yeah. She lived in like a factory town that essentially gets shut down, and it's pretty telling,
like the whole
because
town
they moved.
Is just gone.
She immediately gets a job at Amazon afterwards, which is clearly politically stated, and it's a good point. But what I'm saying is, I don't know. It seems conflicting to me.
No, I know. I know. I can see what you're saying, because it's like, if it's a character's personal journey, then does the political statement have much weight if that's not really what the character is doing it for? Or if it's a politically motivated thing, or you know, more greatly influenced by politics, then does that dampen the emotional side of things, that she's what she really fighting against? Although, to be honest, that's not something I ever felt like I had a gripe. I can understand why you might have a gripe with that. Personally, I'm not sure that really bothers me too greatly. I feel like we can have that duality within a character, within a person, where they're struggling against two sides of themselves.
I just think, as a story, when especially a character, a story set, it is a nitpick for sure, but I just think for a story where so much emphasis is placed on a character, and this is a character study. If I've it's not like a sort of distance character study, anyways.
Yeah.
There wasn't any fucking internal narration or something, thank God. But I feel like when you have a story based around that, the agency of your character is really, really meaningful, and what's driving the character is really, really meaningful. And I do like the fact that what she really wants is kind of a mystery to the character as much as it is to the viewer, but she is motivated by something, and whether she's running away from her past as like a way of coping with her grief, that's one thing, but maybe it's just the setup of the film where you see this completely sort of, she gets her belongings from a lot, what they called the lots with all of the, she takes out her husband's clothes. What are they called? Storage lot?
Like storage, like
storage lot. Sorry,
yeah.
that was eluding me for some reason. It's shot very beautifully, like this sort of grey, desolate, lifeless place. Because this is a place where there was nothing left for her. So I feel like by setting it up, I feel like I'm wording this really badly, but if the film presented her with the option of settling down multiple times throughout, or like the prospect of her sort of coming back to established society, and she kept choosing to go on as she did anyways, that would feel interesting to me. Because she's outright rejected. I know this does happen later on in the film.
Well, that happens a couple times, to be fair.
Where does it happen apart from... I know there's the one scene in the... I don't want to spoil it, but...
Well, there's scenes where she returns to her family, and they kind of offer her refuge and she rejects it. And then there's the scene I think you're thinking of where, she's given this opportunity, like, you can stay here with these people and, you don't have to keep going on the move anymore. And she, quietly one day just goes. And that's actually beautifully done. Both of those scenes are great. I don't have any problem with those scenes. I mean, especially earlier on in the film, because those two parts of the film, that is in the sort of last maybe 30 minutes of the film. I could be wrong. And I don't know, maybe I just wonder why we're getting a lot of poverty themes and all of this kind of stuff if the film is about someone who's choosing to live this lifestyle. I know what you mean.
A little bit at odds with itself. It's such a small problem, but it's something that kind of...
Actually, you know what? Straight up, I think there's merit to that argument, because I genuinely kind of forgot myself that there was that political undertone to it. I mean, there's something inherently political about being nomadic, right? You're basically saying this system, this society is not for me. I'm living outside it, and for whatever reason, it can cross all political lines, but for whatever reason, it is inherently political. But there came, for large portions of the film, I did forget that it was kind of, that there was that political undertone to it, because it was so much about her own personal emotional struggles. So I think that's fair enough. I think that is a reasonable qualm to have with the film.
And to be clear, I really did enjoy it, and I think the stuff in terms of showing the brutality of part-time work and job-to-job work and these low-paid jobs, I think the film does that really, really well. And kind of makes it look as hellish as it really is. And I really appreciate that. The only other nitpick I would really have with the film would just generally be that I do think it maybe slipped into being a little repetitive. Sort of going over similar things. Probably you could have edited a bit out, but at the same time, I did really enjoy a lot of the quiet moments. I think I mean, we haven't even touched on the technical aspects. It's just nice to watch this film. It's beautifully shot by Chloe Zhao's boyfriend, I believe. I forget his name. Okay. Yeah, who they clearly have a fantastic working relationship, because this film has some of the most gorgeous landscape shots of that kind of area of America, and also is not afraid to sort of look at the griminess. Yeah, it gets real ugly, and that and it's beautifully lit. There's clearly a lot of natural lighting going on.
I
really like that shot where she's walking out of the she's parked at that bit where she's at the Nomad camp in the sort of deserty area, and there's the sort of tracking shot of her walking out, just going for a walk. And there's so many shots of her, especially at the sort of golden hour during sunset. Literally just people walking around, and it's just so nice to watch. Really beautiful colour palette, especially with those like sort of purple skies. And the score was pretty good too. It wasn't amazing, but I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but it was more when they didn't use it, and then when they did use it, they used it much more, I felt, in the sort of later end of the film. And I remember when she's driving to that house scene we were talking about, where she's sort of near the coast. They bring in a slightly more emotional piano track to it. It's by the same composer as the person who did the music for The Father, which was also a big Oscars film.
I need to watch that one.
Yes, it got really. It was a completely sort of dialogue-free scene of just her driving, some nice landscape shots and some pianos. But because it's in a film that you've kind of felt that you've lived in and lived with, it feels way more impactful and meaningful. Yeah, no,
I would go with that. And I guess if I had one small negative to say is that sometimes the slow pace, and it kind of ties into what you said, sometimes the slow pace is a little too slow for me. Like, I know I said earlier that like kind of there's a beauty in the way it sort of doesn't really resolve as you reach the end of the film. Like, you get a level of it, but you don't get like the whole sort of full closure. And I know I do like that, but yeah, it definitely has to be said that there were just times where I was like really wishing it would kind of do something a little more, or just be a little quicker.
Maybe one missing beat somewhere that could have been put in.
Yeah, exactly. But other than that, I think this was a glorious, beautiful, gut-wrenching film. Frances McDormand did once again one of her an absolutely stellar performance, and I think she's absolutely deserving of her Oscar win as well. What do you reckon on this? What would you give it?
Yeah, so 7 out of 10, probably like maybe a 7.5 if I did halves. But really, really, there are elements of this film. There are moments in this film where I was completely bowled over. It's like it's such a scary concept, because it's something people don't really think about, because especially in the relative prosperity of today, the comfort that a lot of people live in, the concept that you could just lose everything feels so alien. But 2008 wasn't that long ago, and it happened to a lot of real people.
That's true.
And even in incredibly privileged countries, there are it only takes you could do everything right and still have everything taken away.
You could just live in the wrong town.
Live in the wrong town and just have everything taken away through like one bad couple of weeks.
Exactly.
And that's completely terrifying. And it's the kind of film, if someone said we're going to make a film where someone loses their job, their husband dies, and they just drive around for a bit, you like to make that be something that's actually really powerful and really amazing to watch. Takes a lot of talent, because it's the kind of thing that can either be horribly, horribly cheesy by overplaying its hand, or completely and utterly boring and devoid of anything because it just tries to play it too subtle. And this struck a brilliant balance, I think. So yeah, 7 out of 10. Definitely one of the best films I saw from last year.
Yeah, I'd go 7.5. You know, I was toying with an 8. I was. I felt like towards the end that like there was, particularly with the speech the guy gives. Well, not a speech, but the conversation, the monologue he opens up. Like that really got me. And I was like the ending had a real power to it, but just not quite enough to really lift it up. Sometimes a film can really reveal itself in those final moments, and you kind of, in its conclusion, you really see what it was all building towards. And because this wasn't specifically building towards anything, it was a strange moment of elation and sadness, you know, where you're like, this person is still locked in their ways and they still will sort of continue this journey. We will not get to finish this journey with them. So yeah, 7.5, echoing you, one of the better films I saw last year. And looking forward to seeing more from Chloe Zhao. I mean, I don't think this wasn't her debut film, but this is like, you know, the first I think that a lot of people are hearing of her.
Well, are you aware what she's doing next?
Well, she's doing the Eternals, isn't she?
Yeah, she is. So one of my biggest gripes with Marvel films is how horribly fast-paced they are and refuse to settle into even like a small moment of quiet a lot of the time. So I'm intrigued. I saw the trailer. It looks kind of shit. The trailer, so
I've not.
It doesn't. I mean,
it's got
great.
Some actors I like in it. I'm looking forward to seeing Richard Madden get a proper paycheck after Game of Thrones. Like,
he's
he was so good in that. He was my favourite character. R.I.P. Rob Stark. And
great I've been Bodyguard too.
I need to see that as well.
It sounds insanely ambitious. As I said, I saw the trailer. It looks kind of bad, but. I mean, I'm happy to watch. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the films that Chloe Zhao did previously. Cause,
well, maybe.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah,
maybe she can.
That she seems so interesting.
Yeah. Well, maybe she could do a Taika Waititi. You know, Taika Waititi in a similar position. You know, he came in with a Marvel film, and everyone, as a promising young director, nailed it so much that he's basically sort of ingrained into the Disney fabric at this point. Like, they can't live without him. He's doing everything. He's, dabbling in Star Wars. He might. Have they said he might get his own Star Wars film?
Potentially. I mean, to be fair, Marvel seems like a weird pick for Chloe Zhao. I'd be more interested in seeing her maybe do like a Pixar or like some kind of animated kids film with big budget, like make it look absolutely gorgeous and give us something like really expansive. Like, because clearly one of the best things about Nomadland is the sense of scale you get, because the characters feel so minuscule. It would be cool to see her get to... And I just feel like superheroes... I don't know. I feel like maybe it's just because I'm over it. Like, over lockdown, I realised the only reason I was, keeping up to date with these superhero films was sort of like FOMO. I'll watch them. But like, if they're not popular, I don't really care, If as long as she gets paid and she gets to do something really good, then I don't really care. Eternals can be a 1 out of 10 as long as her next film is as good as Nomadland.
Yeah, damn straight. Well, I guess moving on then. We now come to our second film of the night, which is In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar Wai, film from the year 2000 from Hong Kong, an island with rich cinematic heritage that I'm dying to get more involved in. I've seen a few films from there, and there's some really acclaimed directors and stuff. So I'm absolutely dying to get more involved in that. But this film, contrary to a lot of kind of what is known of Hong Kong cinema, is very slow and contemplative, much like Nomadland. Only this time it tells a sort of classic story of unrequited love It very almost period in its kind of structure. It almost feels like it could have been one of the sadder Jane Austen novels, or except for less snooty and high class, or
less fainting, less women fainting. Yeah,
less of that. But it definitely has that kind of classiness to it. That is aloofness. It's quite strange. I've not really seen a film so recent. I know it's 20 years old at this point, but it's still a sort of film in that era take this kind of style and attitude with it. It's really quite beautiful. So yeah, it is very simply a story of a man and woman. They are both married, and they come closer through the events of the film. They're suspicious of their partners, and the events of the film bring them closer and closer together, and yet they can't. There never seems to be the right moment, and it's brutal in so many ways and beautiful in so many others. I mean, before I keep gushing over this film, Rupert, I will pass it to you. What did you think of In the Mood for Love?
So yeah, I'd seen it once before, and I was really keen to rewatch it because on my first watch I really liked it, and I was suspecting I can kind of tell if I like a film more or less, based on how much I remember of it. And even though at the time I found it kind of frustrating with its very slow pace and intensely subtle sort of stylings of the way the film is presented, I remembered so much of it. So much of it stuck with me, so I was really keen to revisit it, and I definitely liked it even more this time. Because once again, similar to Nomadland, it is a very quiet film, and a film where a lot of the characters barely ever actually say what they mean, and you have to kind of read into them a lot to kind of get what's going on. It's still very involving with the drama of it, and particularly with the presentation. I was praising Nomadland's presentation, but this is probably one of the most iconic visual styles of a film, straight up, of all time. It's so cleverly shot, and everything to do with the colour is just insanely beautiful. And I think you're pretty spot on.
So much red.
Yeah, so much red. I'll let you guess why it's called In the Mood for Love. But I think you were pretty spot on when you said that it feels like a much sort of older style of film. It definitely feels like this could have been a 50s film. If someone, edited out all of the technology in the film that wouldn't have been there in the 50s. In fact, I don't know when the film is even set. I presume not that far back at all. But you could
I think it was set in the 60s and 70s, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's.
I can believe
so
that.
It is set further back than the 2000s. Yeah.
Yeah, but it feels so antiquated and nostalgic, and I mean, I guess ultimately the film is a romantic film, so that's clearly what it's going for. And I mean, it all straight up from the beginning, the film perfectly sets itself up, because throughout this film the camera barely ever moves. And when it does, it moves very, very slowly for the most part. There's a real turning point in the film that we'll get to, where you see the kind of first actual fast camera movement. But the opening scene is basically just, some shots of a corridor as the two main characters move into their new places. And it's incredibly claustrophobic. And the whole dichotomy of the film is basically this kind of claustrophobic chaos of living with, because a large portion of this film is set with these two people living with these really annoying neighbours, who are incredibly nosy, and very friendly. They're not mean or anything, but they're quite annoying, and it feels horribly intimate, but incredibly kind of distant and mysterious at the same time.
Yeah.
And the way it's edited kind of just adds to that, because this film it's kind of hard to pin down how much time has passed throughout this film.
It is, yeah. That's a really good point.
Yeah, and I don't know, just that quality to it, from I think the mystery of it, and the mood it sets up is just, it's just really intriguing to me. even though I knew what was going to happen. It's just the way it progresses and the way it sort of visually says so much without actually the characters saying very much at all. I just think it's really clever and just like completely beautiful to look at.
I mean, it is gorgeous. I think that I mentioned the color, this continuous sort of use of red, I guess, obviously, for passion and stuff like that. But there's these amazing sort of obscured shots of faces. That's a really recurring theme throughout, is that often a shot will only feature the backs of people, or sometimes the shot will be as though you are like a passerby on the street peering through a window. Sometimes there'll be a shot through a window and you'll see like a tiny fraction of someone's head from the back as they're having a conversation, like you're this strange voyeur into their world. There's a lot of shots with like the curtains, the drapes kind of billowing over the lens. Like it adds that level of sort of, that classicness to it, that it feels very old, but it also this strange uncomfortable feeling of watching something unfold very close, not this usual kind of distance that we have when we're watching a film and we just watching events happen. It feels like we are a third party to the events happening. We're in the room or just outside the room watching everything unfurl and fall apart. I guess I do kind of want to spoil it a little bit because I feel like we can't really
say very much. No,
can't really get into it because there's not a huge amount that happens in this film. It's more this back and forth between these two characters. And so, big spoiler, the thing that forces these two people together is that they both moved in next door to each other and they find out that their partners are having an affair with one another. So, the woman's husband is constantly on business trips to, I believe, Tokyo. And the woman, the wife of the man, is sort of constantly gone, and then they realize she has like the same handbag that was bought for the woman that you could only get in Tokyo. So they know it's happening, and we as the audience, again through a strange sort of voyeuristic scene, are shown these things. But what's interesting is sometimes you don't know who you're necessarily watching. There's a couple of times where they never show ever the faces of the partners that are cheating on them, and I think that's really clever because it ends up, for me, I found drawing parallels between the actions of what these two are doing. Because, and I don't even know, there's this one point where I saw a man walk into the room with the woman, and I thought it was her husband. I couldn't really recognize if his voice was different, and then he sat down and it was the man after all. And I thought that was a very powerful mistake for me to make, because I felt like that had to be intentional, or if it wasn't intentional in that scene, the parallel was intentional at some point through the film. You know what I mean?
The ambiguity of it kind of gives the film a slightly ominous feeling. Like, because the way you briefly, I think you hear the voice of the guy's wife, and you see, or you see his wife shot from behind, and you hear the voice of her husband. I forget which way round it is. I think you just hear the voice of her husband actually. There is a scene where the main character of the film, I forget his name, is literally in the room with him, and the film is almost shot from the cheating husband's perspective, and as he talks to him, but you just never see him, and it makes it feel kind of ominous in a way. It kind of adds a level of tension, which is a really, really clever move. And because the characters end up feeling almost quite guilty about what they're doing, despite the fact that their partners have cheated on them, and they kind of have this budding weird friendship / romance together. It adds it makes you kind of feel complicit in what they're doing, because it might feel unrelatable to some extent, because the film is also very distant, and has like barely any close-ups at all. But pretty much the only characters you do sometimes get close-ups of are the main two characters. You kind of really feel their plight, and the fact that they're and I guess it's also just the feeling of loneliness. Like, that's another huge element of the film. The fact that there's so little. I guess there's a lot of intimacy in the film, but not. It's not in the way that you'd typically expect from a romance film, because I feel like a lot of romance films kind of give you. They're almost like action films in that they give you sort of build-ups and payoffs, and but instead of someone sneaking around and then shooting someone, it's two characters falling in love and then having sex, or having a kiss in the rain, and then they fall out and then they get back together, and then there's something that needs to happen. This film feeds you tiny little tidbits, and there's like a few scenes that you could call payoff, but even then, I mean, I read that apparently this film was basically written on the fly, and
really?
the actors and Wong Kar Wai were essentially kind of making the plot up as it went along.
Is that true?
Yeah, and
that's insane.
Apparently, yeah, it is insane, because apparently it was also edited down a fair amount, because apparently they did shoot some scenes where the characters, had sex, basically.
Ah, okay.
And chose not to include it, which I think was really smart, because the ambiguity of the film is what makes it so tantalizing and frustrating, because you really empathize with the two characters. I mean, maybe this is just my nature as a bloke, but I particularly did find myself really feeling for the guy who I think essentially does, even though they get like a good amount of screen time together and separately, I think he does kind of end up being the main character of the film.
I could see that.
Yeah. Sorry, his character name was Chao Mo-wan.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and fantastically played. I'm gonna get this name horribly wrong. Tony Leung Chu Wai. He was probably my favourite performance of the film. Although
I guess
Maggie Chen is she the other? Maddie Chung. Sorry, she was fantastic as well, and ridiculously beautiful. But
I guess
Yeah, apparently she's wearing like a different dress in like every scene of the film as well.
Oh, really?
I'm going on so many tangents now, but the costume department absolutely fucking killed it in this, because
they did.
It looks so great. Like every single outfit is like so fitting for the character.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned claustrophobia earlier, because I think an interesting contrast to how glorious her outfits are is how kind of grimy a lot of the streets are. Like, they often the characters often find themselves in the kind of alley outside of their the flat building that they're in, the apartment building, and it's kind of exposed drain pipes and brickwork and stuff. It's very unflattering and in stark contrast to everything that she's wearing, and I guess it's it plays into this whole angle of their love being a kind of an ugly thing born out of somewhat dire circumstances.
Well, don't the neighbours comment on that at one point? I'm pretty sure there's one point where she goes out and they say she dresses like that to get noodles or something. Yeah,
they do say that, and the neighbours also confront her later, where she's like, where he gets a hotel room away from his normal house so that he decides to kind of focus on his creative exploits, and leaves his job for a good portion of the film. And she spends a lot of time around the hotel, and then they cotton on and they're like, you should be spending more time here, kind of insinuating they know something and kind of guilting her. And I guess it's a really interesting perspective to tell it from, because I think a lot of the time a film would choose to go with a budding romance between two people that have an affair on their other halves, but their love is so overpowering, it was the right thing to do, and even though they've done like a morally, quite sort of dark thing. You know, they've done something bad, but it was for the right reasons.
I guess that would be the more Hollywood version.
That's the Hollywood film. And this film is the total inverse. It's the quiet tragedy of two people who are forced together and by kind of coincidence actually have loads in common and have like a real rapport and like a sort of understanding at a fundamental level. And yet because they have been sort of twisted and torn by this the tragedy of having their other halves cheat on them, they feel like they cannot be together, particularly Maggie Cheung, is that it? Maggie Cheung's character.
Yeah, she's the one she has a lot of like doubts about it.
Yeah, and you know, even though later in the film you know, he kind of out and out says, you know, I love you and I'm sorry if you didn't know that I was feeling this way, and she's like, yeah, I'm sorry if I led you to feel that way. And yet still there are moments after that where she kind of goes after him. It's never really said completely to one another that they acknowledge that they both love each other.
Well, there's a point where, you know, they do express their feelings, and she is the one who ends up crying, and is like, you know, hugging him. Yeah. So it seems like they kind of go to and fro in that way, because there's a point where he seems to sort of, I forget the moment. There's a point where he sort of seems to sort of shoot his shot.
Yeah.
And I guess it's kind of ambiguous though, because another element of this film that I found really interesting is the whole element where, particularly in the early stages of their relationship, where they are role playing as their other halves together.
Yeah.
And they're saying the lines, and then, you know, she like chides him because she's like, you know, he wouldn't say that.
That was a really good scene.
And the film doesn't really tell you, the first time it does this, doesn't really tell you that it's doing it. So it seems quite strange at first. There's just a scene of them talking, and then he's like, would you come up to my place then, or something? And then she goes, oh, he wouldn't make the first move like that. And then I
didn't realise they were doing that earlier in the film. I thought you were specifically talking about that scene where they rehearse how they're going to talk.
No. So yeah, that's that first scene. It's like they're having this sort of discussion as to whether...
Is that the one in the cafe?
No, it's walking back from the cafe, I think. And then he says, you know, well, somebody made the first move. And he's obviously wagering that it was the guy. Because, you know, he's putting himself in those shoes. But I think having that scene early on was really clever, because it kind of, again, casts even more doubt and ambiguity onto everything that they say to each other. Because obviously you can read into the film quite easily and tell when they are and are not rehearsing this to each other. But just because they've done that, and that's clearly something that has influenced their relationship by doing this. Because you could say, like, by doing this, these characters probably grew much closer together, right? By just pretending to do it. Like when they're holding hands in the taxi, because at first they don't do it. She like moves her hand away, but then in a later scene in the film, they just hold hands in the taxi. Yeah, so clearly it has a big influence. So
it's agonizingly subtle, isn't it? Yeah. Like the most you sort of get is that they hold hands and like. Yeah.
The film should be blue for just constantly blue balling you and the characters, like, to a horrendous extent. I also I wanted to give a shout out to that side character, the guy's mate, who kind of brings some levity to the film. He's like weirdly, like, very rarely comes in.
Kind of sleazy.
Yeah, he's like, I need to borrow some money. He was a great character. He brought he was just really funny, and he didn't ruin the film. He wasn't like Jar Jar Binksing it. He just kind of came in, and he was a great contrast for the main character. I just thought he was hilarious.
Yeah, I guess a great way of kind of aligning his moral compass by saying, you know, this is what someone with less of a strict moral code would do in this situation. And perhaps our main character could learn a little bit from him, because he's sort of so straight-laced that he kind of forbids himself from actually, you know, something that could make him really happy. And I know he does kind of shoot his shot, but there's so many missed opportunities in it, and it's such a gut wrench. And I think in that way, it really does feel like almost Shakespearean in that way. It's like there's a real Shakespearean tragedy to the whole proceedings. And I guess to spoil it further, I mean, please watch this if you have any interest based on what we've said so far. We both implore you do watch it and don't spoil it for yourself. But I'm going to talk about the ending. So after he shoots his shot and she kind of says no, he comes to her at a later date, and does he leave her a note? I think he does, and says like, I'm taking a job in Singapore. I'm going over there, and come with me, basically. Like, come with me and we can start anew. We can just rebuild our lives there, and that'll be that. And she gets the thing too late. She gets like the phone call or whatever too late, and by that point he's already gone. But then she still goes, and they miss each other. She's like in his apartment, and they miss each other. It's so deeply aggravating. Did he? Whose lipstick is that?
I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be hers, and then there's something to do with the shoes, right? Isn't there something to do with shoes?
It's very subtle. I missed that, I'm afraid.
And then what? He goes back, doesn't he, to the apartment, and then
and he knows she's been there.
Well, he also trying to remember how this happens exactly. The most aggravating part of the film is the later part of the film where he goes back, and it's implied that at this point a large passage of time has passed. I'm pretty sure. And he sort of speaks with the neighbours as to who lives where she lives.
Yes.
And they say it's a family.
Oh yeah.
And does he see through the window? It's not her, but he thinks it is.
No, it's the opposite, I think.
Is it?
It is her. She's bought the house, the apartment, and it's her little boy. So it's been enough time since that she's had a little kid, say maybe 5 years or something, and it does tell us. I've just totally forgotten. And it's like it's one of those things. He's inches away from happiness, and he walks away.
And then the real ending for the film, this was the bit that kind of gave me the biggest hit of emotion the first time I watched it, and again this time round, is he goes to this, is it in Cambodia?
I think he goes to, it's not Angkor Wat, it's like one of those types of places.
But it's in Cambodia, right? He goes to like a temple
in
Cambodia, and there's this whole thing previously mentioned in the film where what people used to do there if they had a secret is you whisper the secret into a tree, and then you stuff the tree with something or other, dirt,
like a sapling, like a tiny little, like you plant the tree sapling into the side of the mountain, and you leave it there, and so then, he goes to Cambodia.
With the final blue ball, he goes to the place and does that, and then just leaves, and you never hear what he says, and that's just the end of the film. It's like, fuck. Why?
That really is this film. See, where a film like Nomadland has like a kind of quiet sort of resolution, this has a cold, hard fuck you resolution.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, you thought these people could be happy? You're wrong. You're fucking wrong, and you're stupid. You have spent the last 2 hours fucking hoping for the best. Well, it's not. The world ain't like that, sunshine.
I think what elevates this just above Nomadland for me is the atmosphere, which Nomadland has a great atmosphere to it, don't get me wrong. The atmosphere and the presentation adds so much in terms of like the immersion you feel, and the way it's presented adds so much mystery to it, because I think, one of the best things a good film can do is set up like some kind of core mystery that needs to be resolved, and then it can choose to resolve it or not, as long as it's compelling and it's well presented and it has a level of payoff, and this film is there's like a sense of mythology to it, because it mentions this thing about the secret in the tree earlier on in the film, and then the way it calls back to it just feels so sad, and it's really hard to put your finger on
I know what you mean.
Why that is.
It has, there's something very profound about the sadness of this film, about the pervasive sense of hopelessness that is just ever present. Like, there is not a moment in this film where you really feel like it's all going to work out. deep down know that there's just kind of, I think in some ways it's through the music. I think it's also through the stillness of, like you say, every shot is so thoughtful and considered and slow and sometimes abstract and obscured. But then there's this music, and the music that comes in is very frequent. It's kind of repetitive, but it's almost like a kind of funeral march. You know, it's beautiful. It's almost like someone smashed a wedding march and a kind of a funeral march and a wedding thing. I don't know what do you call a wedding song? But anyway,
I don't know.
It's like the two smashed together in this kind of minor, kind of sort of ode to, you know, forlorn lovers. Like it's powerful, but its presence, it comes in a very similar way every time, and it repeats and it repeats and it repeats, and it's this sort of sense of this cyclical nature of things just kind of nearly resolving and then not quite resolving, and, you know, essentially characters finding themselves in the same positions that they ended up in, and being kind of heartbroken at that realization.
Yeah, I mean, it also uses. I mean, Wong Kar Wai. The only other film I've seen of him was Chungking Express, which uses more sort of pop songs in it, and there are a couple of those in here which I thought were pretty effective. Kind of old school sort of loungy pop songs. There was one I remember. It was sung in a different language, so I didn't recognise it, but it sounded sort of quite Western in a way, which Chungking Express also does. It plays California Love like 5 times throughout the film. Sorry, not California Love, California Dreamin'. The Vietnam.
Okay, that's
song.
very different.
Yeah, sorry, not the Tupac song. No.
I thought it was wow. Okay, I didn't know they had Tupac in that.
No. California Dreamin'. That would be very weird.
Okay.
There's no West Coast in that film.
I was going to say, that would be quite something.
But yeah, I noticed this film did it as well, and it was very tastefully used. But sorry, just to quickly come back to the ending. I think the reason the ending is like so, I don't know, meaningful, is I think ultimately the whole idea is like, one of the main things the film is clearly sort of poking fun at, or at least criticising, is how the sort of conservative nature of things, of how people treat each other and the way people look into each other's business and judge other people, and the fear that the two characters and the anxiety they're constantly under, for fear of judgment, despite the fact that they've kind of been put in this circumstance throughout any fault of their own. The film is clearly constantly talking about that, and there's this sense of conservatism and tradition and expectation, and then the whole thing with the whispering the secret into the tree is kind of like that kind of the reason people did this was to not actually express their feelings, right? Because there's this sort of idea that people, I guess particularly men, shouldn't express themselves openly, and the reason people did this tree thing, whether it's a real thing or not, I don't know, but the reason they did this was, this is how you cope with it. You go to a fucking tree and you whisper your secret in, and then it's kind of brought up kind of as like a joke, right? Not even, or like you're not supposed to take it seriously when it's first brought up.
It's just a kind of fun fact.
Exactly. I think I can't remember exactly how it comes up, but it's almost presented like a piece of trivia. When he brings it up, and then the fact that he then actually then goes to the tree and then does that, it's kind of like the last cry of like just absolute desperation. It's like, this is the only way I'm going to be able to deal with this, and it's just like, I don't know, it's so fucked up.
No, it is. Yeah, it kind of, that's a really good point actually. I hadn't really thought about this film commenting on the nature of that kind of status quo, and I guess it makes sense that it's set in a slightly older time. I think there are certainly truths of that kind of attitude that are perhaps more pervasive, still somewhat pervasive in modern times, particularly perhaps in China, although I do not know a huge amount about,
I'm so interested
Chinese
in
culture.
all the cultural things we probably missed in this that are probably really nice details that we're just not
Yeah. But I think ultimately that is the kind of the cure for the film, the cure for the characters is people being able to express themselves. They feel trapped in this situation because to confront not just themselves but the world around them about their situation is just so prohibited, or at least they feel trapped by it. And I guess that's enough, right? Is that if the society that you're in has kind of wormed its way into the back of your head where you can't do it anymore, it's still having that effect on you, even if indirectly. So yeah, it's very powerful.
What would you give it?
I'd definitely give it an 8. I can see myself giving it more, perhaps with future watches. I did really love it though. Like it's a film I think will stay with me for a long time. Where Nomadland, again, I feel when I watched this to the end, I felt like yes, this had what Nomadland didn't, and there's something kind of specific and kind of indescribable about that. But there was a power that carried throughout this, and even though it is similarly quiet and there's very little really happening, it has this real presence and style and grandeur to it that it's just intoxicating, and I'm definitely gonna come back to this at some point. What about you?
Yeah, it's definitely a second watch film. I gave this a 7 on my first watch. It's an easy 8 this time, and I could maybe see it going up like on another watch, because it's so you pick up. I was picking up on a lot more details this time around, because it is really difficult to describe just what it is about this film, just because it's so subtle and there's so many elements at play that aren't kind of put right in front of your face by the film, which I feel like we're kind of used to, because this film is like so we're just going to keep saying subtle and understated, but like, there's really no other way to describe it. But it's not subtle and understated to the point where it's frustrating to watch. You're more frustrated because you're so invested. And unlike Nomadland, which kind of peaks and troughs, there are periods of it where you feel like you've already kind of made this point. I feel like this film has a much clearer sense of characters from one place at the beginning of the film and characters in another at the end, and all of the stuff in between. It just feels that a little bit more detailed, I guess. And I mean, it can't really be said enough just how beautiful this film is to look at, and how cleverly shot it is. With all the sort of tight claustrophobic spaces and the completely stationary camera for most of the film, and then all of the shots where it's split down the middle. There's like so many of those. It's just it's very, very clever, and so much thought is put into every bit, and it's an absolute fucking treat. If you're curious, I mean, I don't know if I'd recommend this to someone as like, if you're interested in foreign language cinema, go straight to this one.
No, probably not, because it's. I think you have to be specifically in the mood for something kind of quite quiet and restrained.
I thought you were going to say in the mood for love.
No, I know. I was trying to avoid it. But I mean, if you're interested in a different side of Eastern cinema, perhaps you've not seen. Perhaps you've seen a few things like Parasite has brought that region's cinema to a far wider audience, and I think that is very energetic and bright and colourful as a film. It's got so much going on, and if you've seen a few films like that have intrigued you, then this will give you a really interesting insight into a whole different voice.
I guess that's why I hate foreign language cinema as a category, because there's like so many different Asian films or Chinese films or Hong Kong films however specific you want to get. There's like tons, and obviously there are genres from those areas that are more popular. Obviously, Hong Kong is probably most famous for like John Woo style stuff, and,
right?
You know, those crazy '90s films,
And like Jackie Chan and stuff like that.
Yeah, all those kind of things. Is Shaolin Soccer Hong Kong, or is that just mainland
I think
China?
it is. It is.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
That makes sense.
Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I
you can
don't
put
know.
a disclaimer up.
It
that
seems
I'm fucking wrong,
seems very Hong Kong, that film.
Yeah.
Like, not everything, you know, from that specific, you know, just that specific area, province, whatever you want to call it, is, you know, there's like a huge diversity to the stuff that you know, other countries put out, and
yeah,
I guess that's it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Obviously, Parasite is, you know, probably, I guess, a little bit more Western in a way. It's more traditionally plotted and maybe a little bit more Hollywood-y. I don't know. But, yeah, this film is fucking excellent. In terms of, if you're interested in, like, that kind of quiet cinema with a real kind of visual treat to it, this is pretty much essential viewing. And I guess there's a reason it always comes up as, like, you know, best foreign films ever made, because it does have that kind of magic to it that's really difficult to describe.
Yeah,
but
yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of this pretty classy episode of the Internally Screening podcast. I think this might be our classiest 2 films that we've covered yet. No duds this week.
Yeah.
No duds this week. So, Rupert, it falls to you to pick our next film.
I know.
So, please.
Oh, God. Okay. I'm stuck between a few films. I'm just looking at them now. Oh, no, I can't do that one. Right. I am going to recommend Harakiri by Masaki Kobayashi, one of the best Japanese directors of all time. As a name, I think he's underrated because he's done some absolutely amazing films. And I feel like most people, if you ask them for their favourite Japanese director, they'll always give you Kurosawa or was his name Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli?
Oh yeah, Miyazaki.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, a lot of people do know this guy. I'm kind of overplaying it, but I feel like for me, he's probably my favourite Japanese director. He did the Human Condition trilogy, which I'm not recommending because it's 9 hours long, but maybe one day, Adam.
Maybe.
Yeah, if I really feel like, you know, you deserve it, then I'll recommend that. But no, Harakiri, or I think it was called Seppuku for the American version, but samurai film, absolute banger in my opinion. I won't spoil it, but yeah, fucking great film. I'm very excited to talk about that.
Awesome. That sounds good. I mean, I'm glad we're sticking within sort of Eastern cinema. I mean,
should we just keep doing this until this becomes like the Eastern cinema podcast?
Yeah. I mean, you know, and you know, to any easily offended people out there, no, I don't think China and Japan are the same bloody place. I'm just, you know, as a region, there is a kind of general collective voice. You know, I think the films from Japan, China, and Korea just have a real je ne sais quoi.
Well, you will see Harakiri, and you will see how different it is to fucking In the Mood for Love.
Yeah, I'm sure I will. Yeah. I'm sure I will. Yeah, no, I'm very much looking forward to it. Hell, if this podcast ends up just being us talking about Chinese, Japanese, and Korean films, that's absolutely fine by me. That is, I am more than okay with that. So yeah, I'm excited for that. And as per, we will find some, current film that we feel fit to discuss alongside it. So, without further ado, thank you very much for watching. If you're still listening, please like and subscribe. If you're on YouTube, if you're on Spotify, give us a follow. If you're on Apple Podcasts,
review us.
Give
5
us
stars.
a little 5-star review. Why not? I should really do these things at the beginning so that you know.
If you don't want to put them off, if they come in and they're like, "Oh, he's already trying to get me to get an Audible
you gotta
book."
get in and out. Look, Rupert, I've seen the statistics. It's not good for us. Okay, so we just gotta hit them around the head with it straight out the gate. So anyway, if you have stuck with us, thank you very much for listening, and we will see you again next time. Peace.
Peace.